Hi, everyone. It's Rob, and thanks for listening in today. I greatly appreciate your time. Wow, what a year. As co-CEO of Image One, I have to say I've never experienced a year like this in all of the 29 we've been in business. But many thanks to all of you for your support. And if you haven't added your name to our email list, please do so. You can go to donothingbook.com and take care of it right there. And if you're a regular listener, you know we've had many important conversations this year with some amazing people. So if you're inspired, please share the podcast with your friends, your coworkers, and people in your network. All right, so let's get to my guest today, Tom Rippin. He's founder and CEO of On Purpose. Based in London, Paris, and Berlin, On Purpose works with professionals that are no longer satisfied with only creating shareholder returns, but instead believe that socially and environmentally focused business models can help solve society's toughest problems. In 2010, they created an educational curriculum that attracts and develops leaders for purpose-driven businesses. Now, Tom reached out to us after listening to our pod with Della Duncan, where we spoke about, among other things, gross national happiness. Now, two fun facts about Tom. He has a Ph.D. in cancer research, and he ran international operations for Red, the business founded by Bono from the musical group U2. Happens to be one of my favorite groups in the world. So I'm excited for you to hear about the impact that Tom and his organization are making in this world and how you will be able to apply this to your own life. Please enjoy my chat with Tom. Hey, Tom, it's so great to see you again.
Hi, Rob. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Funny things happen in this world. You happen to connect with me because you read, I think, on Forbes, a piece about Della Duncan, who we interviewed about, among other things, gross national happiness and different ways of thinking about the economy. So I'm grateful to you for doing that because I got to learn about this amazing organization that you're founder and CEO of called On Purpose.
Well, thank you for taking it up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm wondering if we could just start. Can you explain what On Purpose is all about?
Sure. So On Purpose is a social enterprise, and we develop leaders for what we call an economy that works for all, or what we might also sometimes refer to as being a healthy economy. So we run different types of leadership programs, but the common thread is always that we're trying to help people find work that matters in the world, and find work that is also helping to drive towards a more, a better economy, essentially, one that we need to find that is going to be sustainable, that's going to be regenerative, and that at the same time is going to be able to, create all the services and products that everyone on this earth needs to be able to live a fulfilled life.
What inspired you to start this?
Oh, good question. It's a little while ago now, but I guess there were lots of different things that came together. Some of it was from my own experience. So I'd been through a kind of career change that we help many other people do on our programs now as well. So I had started out professional life as a management consultant, but then moved into what you might call the social business or social enterprise world. So there's an element of having done that myself and having lots of people come to me and ask about, I want to do that. How do I do that? It's difficult and so on. So I realized there was a bit of a demand there. A second motivation, I would say, is a genuine belief in the need to better integrate social, environmental, and commercial ways of working. We I think have historically kind of kept those quite separate often, but that's not actually a very in many ways, not a very rational, certainly not a very efficient way of doing things. And then thirdly, I'd say a genuine belief in the power of finding, good motivated, capable people and providing them with kind of development and support. And that if you can do that, these people will go on and go out and do amazing things,
Mm.
over years and decades to come.
Did I read correctly that you have your PhD in cancer research?
Yes, I did. Yes, actually, before being a management consultant, yeah, I did. I did a PhD in cancer research. Nothing to do with patients. You'll be glad to hear. I was a kind of biochemist, molecular biologist. In that kind of intersection. And I guess, originally I thought I was probably going to become an academic. That was my goal. Probably also determined in part by my family background and so on. And realized, despite enjoying my PhD, I think I realized that that world was not quite for me after all.
Mm.
And so my next idea was, maybe like a lot of people at that age, to try and get into international development. Um, but had at one point a kind of one of those light bulb conversations with a friend whose brother had, shock horror, gone into the private sector, but learned a lot of skills and got a lot of experience there that was then very helpful. And he then transitioned into working in international development as it happened. And so I kind of thought, when I heard that story, oh, maybe that's something I should do too. Go into the private sector first, learn how that works, and then bring that to another sphere. And as often happens, stayed a little bit longer than I expected. And then also became particularly interested, not necessarily in international development, but more generally in how we can use commercial dynamics, business markets, and so on to help solve some of the big, really important social and environmental problems that we all face.
Hmm. That's so great. Can you talk a little bit about the curriculum that these professionals go through at On Purpose?
Sure. So we have different courses, but the main kind of our flagship program is what we call our associate program, which is a 1-year full-time program. And most of the learning actually happens during the week when our associates, as we call the participants, are out working 4.5 days in a week for placement organizations. These can be organizations of all kinds, from big corporates through to small charities, social enterprises, social investors, and everything in between. But the common thread is always that they are trying to integrate and work to integrate social, commercial, and environmental ways of working. Amongst other things, then on Friday afternoon, however, they do come together, and we have a kind of more formal training program, which I think is probably what you're referring to with the curriculum. And there we do a very broad range of things. So at one level, it's kind of what you might expect if you went to a fairly traditional business school as well. So we do some marketing, we do some strategy, organizational development, and so on. I think you need to understand how that world works, how organizations work, and so on. But then we also very much try and combine that with several other things. One is, things like how do you measure social impact? How do we structure organizations that want to be social enterprises or social businesses, and so on? So bring it together with that kind of impact world, thinking about purpose and how do you integrate that. Increasingly also thinking about systems thinking, which we see as very central to this whole debate. And then there is also a lot kind of built in around actually your personal development and understanding yourself, be that your strengths, what you want to do in your career, but also how you operate in different environments, how you behave with other people. So
Hmm.
it's a very broad, I would like to say, holistic kind of program and development that you go through over this year.
What is the typical stage of this person's career that's going through this program?
Mm. Yeah, so most people come to us with, on average, say 5 to 6, 7 years work experience. It's obviously not limited by age, and we have people who are younger than that, people who are older than that, but typically, age-wise, they'll be late 20s to late 30s, I'd say. So I'd say the motivation is often that they have done, 1, 2, or 3 jobs. They've probably been very successful so far in what they've done, but many of them describe almost this feeling of having kind of woken up and realized that what they're doing now is actually not what they want to be doing in 10 or 20 years time. And corny as it might sometimes sound, a lot of them will say, I realized all I was doing was creating shareholder value, and I realized that wasn't enough, and I wanted to do something more meaningful. So they have discovered this need and this want. But actually changing careers in that way and into this kind of space is not always that easy. So that's hopefully when they come across us and when they apply to the program.
For the organizations that support these, the people going through the course, are they purpose-driven organizations to begin with? And is that why they're drawn to this, or are they working
Yeah.
towards it?
Good question. So we actually explicitly work with both of those dynamics that you just talked about. So we will work with very explicitly purpose-driven organizations, social enterprises, charities, social investors, and so on. And we will work equally with commercial companies that have this kind of dynamic built in. Be they B Corps or bigger corporates that are very well known for having sustainability principles at their core. So Interface is an example. We've worked with Ben and Jerry's in the past as well. But we are also very up for working with organizations that are wanting to go through that transition. Because ultimately, I guess we believe that if we're going to bring about this better economy, this healthy economy, actually it's going to take change from all of us and change from all kind of angles and from all types of organizations. And so actually us being able to expose the associates that are on our programs to all these different situations, all these types of organizations is actually all helpful and all useful.
You mentioned systems thinking, and I'm wondering if you can kind of explain what that means to the listeners. And then if you could share it, you have an online program that's launching in the first quarter of 2021. And if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, very happy to. So systems thinking is a relatively new discipline, I suppose. It kind of came to the fore in the 1950s, maybe, and has been developing since then, and is really, in my opinion, where kind of cutting edge science is these days. Maybe helpful to explain that systems, is essentially what the world is made of. So, we as human beings are systems. The bacteria that we come across either inside ourselves or elsewhere are systems. Organizations are systems as well, and even the economy as a whole is a system. So, we've come to realize in the last 50 to 70 years that this is actually how the world works. And alongside that, the kind of discipline of systems thinking has been evolving as well. And people are becoming better and better at describing systems, at understanding how systems work. And I should probably say that this is it's quite different from how traditionally we have thought about how science and engineering works, where if we take a kind of more Newtonian approach, people tend to think of how do we kind of chop everything up into the kind of lowest unit that we can then analyze individually. Whereas the big thing about systems thinking is that rather than doing that you try and look at a system and think of it as its whole. How does it behave as a whole before we start chopping it up? So things like relationships between elements of the system become very important. So, in our human body example, how does the human body as a whole behave, not just how does one human cell behave? Because actually a lot of the magic about how the human body behaves is obviously in how all these cells interact with each other. So that's a tiny bit about systems thinking. And then what this course that we're launching in the first quarter of next year is going to be about is actually systems thinking has now gone even further and is now starting to uncover, how healthy systems behave. So interestingly, it turns out there are kind of universal principles of how healthy systems behave. Healthy systems of all kinds, whether they're human-made or natural systems, they actually all conform to a set of characteristics that we can describe and often describe quite quantitatively. So the course, in essence, is around, okay, so if we know this thing and this is where cutting-edge science is really at, that actually has relevance to how we think about our economy, that has relevance to how we think about our organizations, and ultimately, of course, how we run our organizations, because we need ultimately our economy to be healthy. We need our organizations to be healthy. So if from systems thinking we know what that looks like, well, we should surely be kind of trying to figure out what that means in practice and how to make that
Mhm.
happen.
So let's use Ben. You mentioned Ben and Jerry's. So most
Mm.
people love ice cream. So that maybe it's relatable. How does Ben and Jerry's take this and incorporate this into their organization and their way of thinking?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. Uh, I think there are kind of three elements of this that are important to organizations. One is to think about what does this mean for your purpose as an organization. Second is to be kind of a lot more conscious and aware about what this means for the values that we consciously or unconsciously often actually work with in organizations and more broadly in society. What are those, and how does our organization behave based on the values we hold? And then thirdly, how do we very practically actually kind of make that, uh, what kind of management practices practically do we apply that are in line with this kind of purpose and these kind of values?
Mhm.
And I could go on for a long time on each of those, but I'll try and give you maybe the headline on each of the three. On purpose, one of the things that I often say is that, interestingly, if you look at kind of natural systems, like let's go back to our human body example, the purpose of a human cell appears to be, I mean, we can't ask it obviously, but appears to be that it's trying to help maintain the health of the human body it's in. It kind of knows what's my role in contributing to keeping this body healthy. So what if we asked ourselves that question for organizations? What if Ben and Jerry kind of asked itself, in the systems that I'm in, be that the dairy system where I kind of get some of the milk that I use in my ice creams, be that the sugar kind of raw cane supply chain system, be that also the system of my customers, and maybe even the kind of geographic communities that I'm located in. What role would I play if I asked myself the question, how do I contribute to the health of these systems? So that maybe is a kind of little
Yeah.
taster on purpose.
Mhm.
On values, I think it's a lot about, realizing that, I believe that we as a kind of society, and certainly as economic actors, as organizations, need to go through quite a fundamental shift, and by that I mean a shift at the kind of values level. I touched on it already with that kind of idea of going from, kind of Newtonian ideas and so on, and how we've thought about science and engineering for a long time, to kind of one of more around systems thinking. And that kind of fundamental shift can only happen if we really re-examine our collective values. And I often say that, we seem to have managed to, uh, you know, kind of develop collectively a set of values that are giving rise to a way of behaving at the individual, at the organizational, but also even at the national and kind of economic level,
Mhm.
which is not creating the outcomes that we need or want. So how do we think about developing those values? How do we mix them slightly differently, bring in some different ones, move towards something that's going to help us bring about a healthier system? And then thirdly, the management practices. This is obviously where it gets most applied. And so it's then kind of understanding, okay, what kind of management practices are more aligned with that kind of way of thinking about purpose and that kind of way, those kind of values that we want to develop, versus which ones are less so. And I actually think the good news there is that there are quite a lot of quite mainstream management practices that are already out there, which more and more people kind of using and coming to accept, um, which are already aligned with this kind of new way of thinking. We may just not explicitly realize that that is what they're doing, but we can co-opt some of those, if you like, maybe put them in service of a slightly different purpose, and away we go. So it's not actually, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Some of these changes are a little bit more subtle than we might think, and that's actually good news, I think.
Mm. Are there companies or organizations in different countries, given your experience, that are doing this better or more aware of it than
Mm.
others?
There are certainly examples of all kinds of organizations all over the place, in all countries actually, that are doing bits of this. The thing that I always look for is, can you find organizations that are trying to do this with a different set of values, and who are consciously trying to do that? I don't think any of us can say what's the right set of values. It's not about, are they doing this and this and this, but are they just even experimenting, trying to do something a little bit different? There are well-known examples like Patagonia. I'm sure many of us are familiar with, and their stance they take on Black Friday, as we've just had, very topically. Interface is an organization that we've worked with for years, who are a carpet tile manufacturer. They may not be known amongst consumers very much, but I think the third or fourth biggest carpet manufacturer in the world. They have this kind of new, really amazing concept of trying to think about their factories as if they were a forest, by which I mean that not only should this factory produce carpets, it should actually also be kind of have a net positive impact on the environment that it's in. In the same way that a forest not only produces, I guess, the trees and the plants that are part of it, but it also provides a whole bunch of kind of ecosystem services alongside that, be that storing water or creating oxygen and sinking carbon dioxide. So that's just a couple of them, but and many of these organizations are not, it's not only the big corporates. We see a lot of startups who are trying to start up with a genuinely different kind of ethos, who say, no, I want to do it differently, even down to the fact that, I don't want to take traditional investment because that's going to force me down a particular route to a particular line of thinking. So I want to stay more independent than that. So yes, there's lots happening all over the place. I don't think any one organization has nailed the full thing yet, but collectively, I often say, I think collectively the future is actually already here. We just need to be able to piece it together from all those different experiments that are going on all over the place.
I love the optimism too. Are you seeing investment vehicles for some of these startups that are more supportive of that mindset?
Mm. Yeah, and that's a really big question, because investment has a massive impact on organizations. Obviously, there's obviously the whole social investment industry, and I think we know quite a bit about that here in the UK. We have quite a thriving industry of that type, well documented, and I think that's useful and interesting, and they are trying to do things differently. But I think beyond that, there are also other ways of doing it. I think the whole kind of crowdfunding idea is interesting. Can I raise money through either pre-selling some of my products, or through even just having a very kind of distributed form of ownership, which is helpful, which then manages to avoid maybe some of the dynamics which come with kind of VC investment, or later on private equity investment, where you might get very driven towards growth, and where you might not be able to pursue some of the other angles of your purpose that you're more interested in. And of course, this then quickly comes into the whole ownership question as well, where there are also lots of interesting different, and well, some of them new, some of them actually very established and old models coming about. The cooperative model has been with us for several hundred years, but there are kind of new riffs on that as well. Employee ownership and so on, which can relate to the investment question as well.
Yes. Now, how many people have gone through the program at On Purpose?
Yeah, so in our associate program, we've had it's about 600 people now, and that's across 3 cities in Europe, so across London, Paris, and Berlin.
Any interesting stories? I'm sure there's
Oh, all
quite a
kinds.
few. Love to hear
Yeah,
one though.
yeah,
One or
sure.
two.
Yeah, so let's try and pick out one or two. Let's go. I mentioned Interface earlier, and that we've worked with them for a long time. We've had several of our associates have worked with Interface during the program, and so been placed there, and one or two of them have carried on working there as well. And one of them is one of our alumni called John Koo, who before he came to On Purpose was a corporate lawyer, had worked in 2 or 3 different law firms. So you might say a very kind of specialist skill set in many ways. But found his way to us, came on to On Purpose, and as I say, worked at Interface during the program, worked on a fascinating project called networks, actually, where carpets, you may or may not realize, are made to a large degree of nylon, and nylon is of course an oil product, so is not particularly environmentally friendly. And so Interface has long kind of wondered about, how do we source this material? How do we make it better? And John Koo, along with some of our other associates, actually worked on a project called Networks, where a social enterprise was developed in Interface's supply chain that paid fishing villages to collect discarded fishing nets from the oceans. And it turns out these fishing nets are made from exactly the same type of nylon as you need to make carpets. So they're the perfect kind of input raw material for making carpets. But you also have some additional benefits of, you can create another kind of revenue stream for these fishing villages. And of course, you clean up the oceans at the same time, because otherwise what would often happen is that these fishing nets are just discarded at sea and can then damage coral reefs and so on. So, and John has gone on to, work on that project and now be a sustainability manager, more generally an innovation manager, I believe, for Interface. So that's just one of our fellows, as we call them, once they graduate. Yeah.
I love that. And, it just goes to show you, when you get into this and you start uncovering it all, it's so interconnected. I mean, to think that all of a sudden there's these nets that had, probably to many no value once they were used and left to be discarded, now all of a sudden have value. And you're working directly with these fishermen or whatnot, and it's really amazing when you start to uncover it all. In my mind, I love the connectedness of it all.
Definitely.
I wanted to ask how COVID has affected the program, with so many being at home now. Has it, or is it still full speed ahead?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely still full speed ahead.
Great.
And touch wood, we're doing okay so far. So actually, one really interesting effect that we had is that, so we start programs every 6 months. So we're recruiting people to come onto our programs and recruiting organizations on quite a regular basis. And one really interesting thing was that for our October program that started just a month or two ago, we had the biggest number of applications we've ever had across our 3 cities. So there's clearly something in the COVID situation. I mean, we'd like to think, of course, it's all down to our better marketing and so on. But I have to admit, I'm sure there is something in the general situation as well, where people. And this was kind of before. This wasn't down to like lots of people already having lost their jobs and therefore trying to look for the next thing, because it kind of you had to apply quite a while ago. So it was I think down to people kind of realizing this crisis, this shock, making people sit up and just think a little bit actually and say, well, hang on a sec, is the way the world is going okay? And if not, am I doing something with my work that is maybe counteracting that? Am I through what I do, 8 hours a day or whatever it is, am I kind of trying to push things in the right direction here, or could I do more? And I think this kind of big shock that we've collectively had has made a lot of people ask these kind of questions. And so that's maybe one silver lining of a very difficult situation.
Yeah. I was curious that you've got programs in 3 cities, London, Paris, and Berlin. Do you ever find differences in the cultures as it relates to this subject?
Yeah, there are definitely differences in the cultures and differences in the economies as well. So,
Right.
I think certainly when I talk to, colleagues and kind of stakeholders and customers and so on in Germany, they will be very quick to point out that they don't follow an Anglo-Saxon capitalist model, that they think of their form of capitalism already being more social, already explicitly involving workers, for example, in the governance more explicitly, and that kind of thing. So yes, there are those differences, and in France, of course, as well. There is, in many ways, greater. You think of France as having significantly greater regulation on a range of topics than say the UK does. But for me, actually, the really interesting thing is that although there are those differences, the excitement and the interest amongst whatever we want to call them, early career professionals, the type of people that we work with, is actually remarkably similar. I think everyone realizes that we need a different way to run our economy. We need a different way to think about our organizations. And I remember when we first went to Paris, which was where we went as a first city after London, and we were holding a recruitment event somewhere in the center of Paris. It was in a bar, uh, and I remember kind of going into it and thinking, being a little bit nervous, talking to all these people and going, are they good? I'm kind of, I know that they think of me as being this Anglo-Saxon thing, and the French are very certain that they're very different. Is this going to work? But the thing that was amazing, that just 10 minutes into conversations with these amazing smart professionals who turned up for this event, who were seriously considering changing their careers, I saw that they had many of the very same motivations and interests and desires as the people that we work with in the UK, and I'm sure as people around the world do as well. And again, that actually gives me cause for hope.
Yeah, we're more alike than different.
Mm.
I'm curious, I'm in the US. Are there any organizations like this serving the US that you know about, or are you guys coming here?
Yeah, it's a good it's a good question. There are one or two organizations that are similar in the US. There is one whose name I always forget, I'm afraid, but I can look it up for you, and we can maybe put it in a link below
Sure.
this podcast or something. They are a little bit more focused on, I would say, the kind of non-profit or charity angle, so maybe not so explicitly about this integration of social and commercial ways of working,
Mhm.
that I'm aware of. And there are one or two programs that have a similar structure in terms of kind of being a work placement and so on, but actually maybe be posting people abroad rather than kind of doing it in the US.
Interesting.
So I haven't quite found the exact analogy of what we do in the US
Mhm.
yet. And who knows, we might well come to the US one day. If you know people, or if people listening know people who are interested in bringing us there and supporting us,
Yeah,
we are a self-sustaining social enterprise, but we need a little bit of investment to get going for the
right.
first few years. Then we'd certainly be up for having that
I
conversation.
love it. Let's make that happen.
Mhm.
Maybe this leads into the wiring that I've had through my career being in the US. This maybe leads into this question, but one of the things I was thinking about in preparation was for large organizations, specifically those that are public, how does purpose before profit actually resonate with the shareholders? So they want a return on their investment, dollars.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I might be going out on a limb here, but I would say, well, maybe we need to pay a little less attention to the shareholders overall, and more to our general stakeholders.
What?
I would probably even go further than that, but
Yeah.
I'll do it in stages.
Okay.
I mean, that might sound controversial, but even the US Business Roundtable has now acknowledged that, who were, of course, a long time the bastion of the shareholder primacy doctrine.
Mhm.
So I think that is becoming, more and more acknowledged. I would, in fact, even say that if you are trying to think about purpose as a way of obtaining profit, even that is actually not the right way to go about it, because I think you are then still fundamentally slightly misunderstanding what purpose is about. Purpose is the reason you do this thing, or whatever it is you're doing. It is your raison d'être. So if you are kind of adopting purpose because it's going to make you more profitable, or because it's going to make your employees more fulfilled, or because it's going to make your customers more loyal, actually, I don't think you've quite got the right idea yet. You need to be able to articulate your purpose in terms of, what is my contribution to the world? What am I actually here to do? Now, I don't disagree that if you can articulate that very well and behave accordingly, then actually some of those other things will follow. but this is the subtle point. The irony is that if you're doing it because of those other reasons, actually, I think you're going to be
Mm,
less likely to be successful. You
mm,
kind of have to be doing it for the right reasons, and then you know. Hopefully it'll work out well, and you will have all those kind of benefits that come with that.
mm. Very well stated. I appreciate that. And it's something for us all to think about. Tom, is there anything I missed? Something I should have asked you, something you want to share with the audience?
Sure. Let's have a think. Well, I think we've covered a range of things. I mean, maybe just one very quick analogy that I like to talk about, and I'll try and keep it short. But you know, thinking about systems is often difficult and complex because systems are complicated. So I often try and um, make that a little bit easier by thinking about our bodies, which I've already alluded to a couple of times. But you know, if you think of our body as a system, and you think of our body as uh, uh, analogous to an economy. Let's assume that our body was like an economy, and you have your human cells that are producing all the products and services that our organizations do. You have blood pumping around resources and money through our economy. You have the nervous system, you know, circulating data and information. You get the picture. You know, the thing um, that I always think to myself is if we were to do a kind of health check on this economic body of ours, we'd very quickly discover, and this is, I realize, a little shocking, but we'd very quickly discover that we're actually suffering a pretty advanced stage of cancer. You know, I won't go into the details, but you know, we have a lot of cells that are growing for growth's sake. They're trying to get as big as possible. They're trying to take over other cells. They are, you know, they're sucking in a disproportionate amount of resources from other parts of the body. They are starting to break off and colonize, you know, hitherto, you know, unaffected bits of the body and so on. These are all, you know, I'm sure I don't have to spell it out for you, things that happen in cancer and things that I think you can quite easily draw some parallels with our economy as well. And for me, you know, a lot of the big question of what this comes down to is what if we could get our organizations to behave more like healthy human cells? How is it that these cells know what their role is in keeping our body healthy? Every cell, and we have a tremendous, you know, we have 37 trillion cells in our bodies, and yet every single one knows what role it needs to play to make the whole system healthy and make the whole system work. And that's ultimately, I think, what we're trying to think about it on purpose. How can we get organizations to behave a little bit more like that as well? Because that,
Mm.
I think, will ultimately help us get to a place where, you know, we will have that kind of that economy where we can all live fulfilled lives on a planet that is healthy too.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy. Thank you for sharing that.
Not
Glad
at
we
all.
didn't leave without talking about that. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me today, Tom.
Thank
It
you very
means the
much
world
again,
to
Rob.
me. You know, bringing this conversation about leading with genuine care is so important, especially now more than ever. And you're definitely doing that in this world. And I'm grateful to you for that.
Well, thank you, Rob, for having me. It's much appreciated, and I've hugely enjoyed chatting and having this conversation as well.
And to all of our loyal listeners, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. And as always, I wish you all much love and gratitude.